Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today at Discovery Garden Service Provider Showcase here among IslandoraCon's closing hours. Today, we'll be reviewing Discovery Garden's standard offering and what helps make it what it is. We'll be reviewing when it comes to the seemingly daunting tasks that is related to migrating data from a now legacy system of something like Islandora 7 to a more modern solution like Islandora 2.0. Exploring as well usability and accessibility improvements we have made to the front end via customized and accessibility-based theme layer, and a suite of modules and accompanying configurations to hit the ground running. So before elaborating on DGI's approach on these topics, just a little bit more about myself. Slides are not going, there we go, sorry about that. So again, I'm Morgan. I've had the pleasure of working with Discovery Garden for nearly a decade now. I've had the opportunity to work on projects that range from Drupal 6, a little bit, at least Drupal 6, all the way up to modern Drupal and Islandora. As such, with every iteration we'll be discussing today, this current one will be running on Drupal 9. I started as a junior developer with Discovery Garden, worked my way up to here. So as a senior dev, my time is more so focused lately, cards on the table, with front-end development. So that's what I'm probably most excited about. It's a very exciting place to be. So I'll be focusing a little bit on that as I go through the presentation. So site building in modern Islandora makes for a pretty robust building experience. A little bit of background on Discovery Garden, what makes us unique. I'll get through these fairly quickly, I think. DGI was founded in 2010 out of Islandora project at the University of Prince Edward Island. It went on to found the Islandora Foundation in 2013. And over the years, we've performed more than 500 installations, over 200 clients and counting. So in addition, our staff's accumulated more than 100 years worth of combined experience working with Islandora and have helped clients protect more than an estimated somewhere around 100 million plus files and growing by this point. So not to mention we're an active member in the Islandora Foundation and technical contributor to the Islandora project. As a result of the years of experience and our talented staff, we offer full ranges of services and support and exclusive Islandora-based products for digitized archives, as well as integration with AWS, as Luke just pointed out in his presentation, and leveraging modern storage architectures via AWS. Now, I left this slide in just for someone to take a look at later on if they're digging through the slides. DGI's work and product offerings has been growing and been refining itself over the years since Drupal 6 and providing support for every major version in lockstep, essentially with Islandora and the community. Well-managed version lock composer files have their own accompanying sets of configurations, so site managers and repo administrators can spend less time configuring an instance of Drupal and Islandora, more time curating, ingesting, migrating, actually working with their content, as opposed to actually setting up a basic site out of the box. This kind of delivers it, so to speak. Now, the default content type repository item that we're all used to working with has been customized with a large set of fields out of the box. So representing field data from schemas like mods, markxml, and more. Now, with an on-staff metadata librarian, Chris, who just introduced me, we can also help with the planning phase of migrations as well. So to help make sense of how fields might map between different metadata schemas to fields that appear in modern Islandora and Islandora 2.0. So we'll talk a little bit more about migrations a little bit later on. And finally, as Luke pointed out, we offer AWS integration. I'm just going to continue such an elaborate job talking about that. Okay, so now with those introductions out of the way, on the order of the session, order of business here. So the topics I'm looking to talk about today include DGI's Islandora Drupal integration standard, how it helps achieve your digital archive requirements and goals. I'm going to talk about search and product discovery. I'm going to show off a little bit of a custom theme and presentation layer configurations, including what comes out of the box. I'll outline how to make the site a little bit more tailored to a given institution's needs, with built-in configurations leveraging both core and contributed Drupal modules. We'll be reviewing DGI's integration as well with migrations and talk about the tooling available to help get from a now legacy system of Islandora 7, something like that, into something a bit more modern, like Islandora 2.0, running the latest versions of Drupal. So we'll also be reviewing some completed migration examples before the end, and there might be one more thing. We'll see. So this portion will be discussing DJI's standardized product offerings. So we'll talk about the usability enhancements and focus around day-to-day exploration and use of the search. So off the bat, again, let's talk about search results. Content discovery, promotion, curation. They appear at the heart of daily interaction with Islandora. So exposed search forms on every page and pre-configured search autocompletes together can help quickly and easily help you find what you're looking for on one of these sites. Further, set by applying things like some of the pre-configured facets or one's easily created client-side post install that can be added to the backed up configuration. The content of a search result can be narrowed down and exported in a few different formats. So for example, CSV, XML, all via Views data export integration. Complementary to that, collection searching or just searching within a given collection is also integrated into the latest versions of our offering to be configured or enabled as required. As the accepted community solution seems to be, collection search, among other things, requires an indexed hierarchy field. Leverage the result sets, that is. So combine that with the base themes integration with the color module and ongoing integration with third-party modules like groups. Some compelling displays can be configured out of the box. Default search results displays in Islandora are using a rendered entity view mode, much like community versions are as well. So we've configured these with a handful of useful EVAs or entity views. You can configure them yourself, add them to your displays, and play around with how they're rendered and how they're formatted to your heart's content, essentially. So in addition to that, you get the typical grid, list, card view displays that all appear within the search results pages. Now, some of the most notable improvements include integration with Views bulk operations, which is leveraged to expose a member operation tabs on the excuse me, I get caught up in my own notes, which is leveraged to expose a member operations tab to perform field modifications across, multiple objects that might be within a given collection. So also complementary to that, and improvement to the compound object display and some page parent member metadata displays, which are both, on the same page, both whether it be the compound itself or the members of the compound. It's a dual compound membership display. The base theme also supports integration with Layout Builder module too. So customizations and displays of metadata and their view modes can be pretty easily customized in a more friendly drag and drop interface that the module provides. Now, admittedly, this begins to blur the lines between site building and simple configuration, but with the right support goes a long way to realize the intended layout of these crucial entities. And finally, accessibility improvements have been made across the board, built into the theming layer, targeting WCAG 2.0 standards. So integration and support are always improved as time goes on. So that is to say that, well, that is absolutely what we aim for. It's not a process, in my opinion, that's ever really finished. There's always going to be improvements to be made upon that. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So in addition, I'm going through my notes, making sure I cover everything. Okay, so some improvements added into base include configurable keyboard navigation, element highlighting, color branding, width of that highlighting is all configurable as well, including some sensible text that's being altered in and added in via some complementary modules to add things like area attributes and labels where they're needed for navigating via keyboard or for using like a text-to-speech navigator. Things like that have been integrated and built into the base thing. Transitioning from the usability enhancements I discovered, I'd like to talk a little bit what DJI has been up to in terms of its presentation layer overall. Well, in modern Islandora, as with any modern Drupal site, mostly any theme could be used from Drupal. DJI's aim here is to provide a sensible, streamlined base theme to configure branding and accessibility, logos, footers, footer settings, forms, and more. So in addition to the Bootstrap-based configurations you get out of the box, some contributed modules and proprietary modules, I suppose, have been leveraged to meet these goals on the front end. We employ a back-end theme called Gin, which provides a clean for administrators. I'm not going to focus on Gin as it's just a contributed module, but it's really, really pretty administrative theme we like to use. So by making tweaks to the default site configuration in our standard installation, customizations in the theme settings page exposes a wide variety of layout options on the front page, including things like, and I know it was a bit laughed at yesterday, having a slideshow available, but there is a slideshow available. And it doesn't necessarily need to be used. You can turn it on or turn it off. It's all included in the base configurations. Now, it can work with standalone uploads, pre-existing media that's found within your repository. And of course, there's also a series of view-based display blocks that are found on the front page, whose content and layout can be configured to match display requirements. So a handful of these blocks can actually just be turned on and off with a flick of a button in the theme settings page, while others are a bit more involved in configuration. I mean, by just turning them on or off configuration page. So between a Bootstrap grid-based configured footer, which includes sponsor blocks, you see on one of those slides there, this kind of makes building a front page, at least, much easier, I suppose, when you're just working with pre-existing views. You don't have to go to where you build them. And there was some talk about thumbnails too, and I want to touch base on how we're approaching the whole thumbnail issue and what we're doing in our modern offering. Now, that said, one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And so custom component library that we developed for use with the theme and its integration with the SES PHP compiler allows for easier module style based overrides and plays nicely with CSS aggregations. And because the theme settings, colors, or something like RGBA, for example, are being passed in via CSS variables and attached to the head of the DOM, branding can be extended to any custom work that might be done in a module by implementing those shared resources. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but essentially it just really means that your color palette, when it comes to the presentation layer, is already there. So if you're building something, all you really have to do is keep in mind what these CSS variables are and leverage them in your own CSS library. I wanted to highlight the color module integration and how it's used. So in addition to a few other theme settings of interest I put on the slide here, a given install profile is really broken down to a 6-point color palette in what we're doing. So 2 of which are designated for the homepage gradient, found on top of or in place of an image, which we saw in the previous slide, which of course can be configured or turned off as well. So things like element focusing and border colors and border widths are all configured out of the box and ready to go, as well as a slew of alignment and mobile logo customizations. So you can configure for different breakpoints, different sets of logos that you might want to use to make them smaller. So you don't have to be continuously communicating, that is, with DGI. We don't have to update your theme for you every single time. All of this is baked into the configuration of the theme. The primary, secondary, and tertiary colors are all implemented throughout the theme in a coherent way. So consistent transparencies are automatically applied to all visual elements on the site out of the box. So exposing color configuration like this does mean you can break accessibility requirements and background, foreground, color aspect ratio changes. So we do aim for the WCAG 2.0 standard. It's hardly possible to go beyond that depending on your color scheme. So at that point, you might want to look at some customization appearance of the theme if those color branding requirements are needed. Well, I thought it'd be nice to take a look at was DGI Image Discovery Module. Now, I wasn't sure I was even going to mention this one today. I could have sworn I heard someone within the last couple of days say something about that old thumbnail, like regarding an audio file, an audio thumbnail. Now, this isn't a replacement for something we see in a legacy site like default thumbnails or Islander image cache default thumbnails. Both of them worked in a very different way. What's happening here is a subscriber-based dispatch subscription kind of service. So for some content models that don't actually have content associated with them in terms of thumbnails, like page content or compound objects or things like that, this module will kind of dig through the hierarchy. It only goes so far, but it will look for actual media thumbnails that are attached to children and present those too. And it does it in a way by attaching it to a field handler in view. So you can use this with you can build your own views around it. You don't necessarily have to have that item right there ready to go. It doesn't have to have a thumbnail associated with it to pick it up from its children, essentially. I thought that was pretty useful considering it's a subscription-based thing. So there's nothing stopping you from writing a plugin to subscribe to that event and change what that default being returned is based on a content type kind of mapping. So if you want audio thumbnail to be that, or a compound to be this, something like that is absolutely possible via the plugin interface now by just subscribing to those events. Digital collections utilities is another module that's meant to be complementary for the theme. I'm running out of time. I only mention this because there's a lot of talk about groups and how to break things up, different collections. So as a themer, I can't help but think about how to go about branding these individual collections and leveraging a color palette that's so configurable. We're extending that color palette now. So with its integration with the SCSS PHP compiler, we're hooking reload so we can add these CSS variables, but there's also an event-based system here too. So you can subscribe to that event based on what group a collection or an object might be a member of and completely change the branding requirements, including things like logos and colors. So you go from having one configured set for the rest of the site, and when you enter into a group that's representative of a given institution or what have you, all of a sudden the colors and branding can change dynamically and configured leisure as well. Excuse me. What this might look like. This is currently using an enhanced collection pages module, something we put together for a client we're working with now, which is representing what I just kind of described. So you can go from having one look to something completely different. That's a custom header we're seeing at the top there with some home, about, explore, and all that fun stuff. But the rest of the color scheme just cascades down. So by leveraging these CSS variables, by using them with the existing 4 to 6 point color palette to serve the theme, it's very easy to make these kind of customizations on a group basis. So, and so we've talked about migration tools quite a bit throughout IslandoraCon. So I'm going to quickly speed through this and quickly talk about TGI's approach to this. So let me see here. Probably working with migration tools or Islandora Workbench, I should say. Community tools provided at Islandora Core, like using Drupal Migrate. Garden has a very different solution, which I'm going to be going over. But there's always other options too, like, sorry, I'll try and speak closer to the mic. Not to mention something like bespoke solutions, like exporting data streams and converting. On what DGI is doing. And forgive me, I am kind of moving along quickly here. So the migration review really begins with the data analysis phase, and along with the analysis comes the analysis response and testing and iterative development. So kind of going over from beginning to end, what works and what doesn't, and using our guide you along the way. So this is making point of the data the data survey and profile documentation that's kind of built along the way with your institution, but should one not exist, we can also help you build one. So laid out in its simplest form, the migration workflow is pretty straightforward from a Drupal migrate perspective. Discoverygarden relies on things like this. Data is extracted from the old system, such as in our case, Fedora's object-based data store, as we're talking about it now. The data that's analyzed becomes a map, and that map will inevitably be further refined. The migration definition is built in a form that Drupal understands, and the migration is then ran and reviewed accordingly. And iterations always come along the way as necessary. The migrations just don't work the first time. I think Alan Stanley said that about a dozen times, and he's right. So Discoverygarden focuses more on the migration module. Using a series of modules and submodules, DGI Migrate utilizes a sensible base field mapping out of the box for use in our digital collection solutions. One that conforms to an extensive list of convenient and pre-existing fields that appears within that mapping. So specific client submodules are still quite possible, but not always absolutely necessary, as a XSLT web-based upload. Now you can apply transforms from directly mounted NFT stores. I think Luke may have gotten to that. Oh. Now, as opposed to making HTTP requests to a Solr endpoint or using curation tools to create a CSV or CSV ingest-based migrations, these migration processes are capable of reading directly from Fedora. So one of the benefits of this approach is reading from a pre-existing source of truth, so not just from a set of Foxml exported files. And of course, if you're doing something like this, like reading over a mount, it's recommended to do an ingest freeze. So while the object source potentially mounted read-only, the current site would stay up and running while the destination site would read the ingest data store over NFS. It's been discussed a handful of times about needing twice as much space or needing 3 times as much space. So this kind of goes towards trying to solve that issue. Or talk about it, but I'm just going to move on to some examples because we're running a little bit low on time. One to highlight what we're doing with the University of Limerick. This is now live. Please feel free to check it out. This is a result of the migration strategy we just talked about. So that is, it was in use, excuse me. So the metadata, including taxonomy terms, paragraph, field types, all of this was created using this migration strategy. So after completion, the University of Limerick staff were able to use existing tools to modify the hierarchy, curate the data with pre-installed tools like views bulk operations and views bulk update, excuse me, and apply new metadata modifications en masse to objects within collections. All of that was done post-migration to the user interface. Or, excuse me, under the layout, I wanted to highlight with our compounds, complementary to the download, technical metadata block, and all that fun stuff. It's a one-page stop for showing off members of a thing, and compounds are one of those things that does take advantage of the Discoverygarden image for children and present that in search results or anywhere where you might have a view configured to show those results. This is just a display that's built in, so you can leverage it. Can be used for more than just compounds, though. It can be used as a collection display if you really wanted it to. It can be used for newspapers or page content, things like that. There's any number of ways you could configure it because, quite frankly, it doesn't care. It just looks for members as of right now. So another example page, just to show that on compound object pages, depending on how data is architected, you might have a lot of information in the metadata on a compound object and not necessarily on all of its children or vice versa. So to help that along, I guess, both the part component that you're looking at and the compound object metadata itself are on the same page, and you can tab between the two of them as you like. This was particularly tricky using the and this is one more option, or to check out the William and Mary libraries. It's recently been completed. This one does use a CSV export for your views bulk operations, but there is one more thing. There's a bonus slide, and I'm running out of time, but there's free stuff to talk about. Free stuff. Now, it's my privilege to announce a new module for the community to leverage, DGI Fixit. This is a new contributed module being made public and sponsored by UConn and CTDA. So a special thanks on behalf of DGI for making it possible to give this back to the community. Explain what this module is and cards on the table. I wasn't the one directly behind building this, but we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. It defines a new content entity type, fixity check. So this entity is used as an audit trail essentially for fixity checks that are performed on a related file entity, wherein the revisions of the fixity check record and results of previous checks against that file entity are stored. So this module requires and enforces that following constraints on these new entity types of fixity check. So for example, things like file must be, the node or media must be related to a file, relations must be unique, file relations cannot be changed after creation. These are all optional to enforce against this fixity entity check entity. Excuse me. So also via a series of permissions, users can do things like manually remove fixity entities, mark files as required for periodic checks, generate new fixity check entities for all previously existing files prior to its installation, as well as manually perform checks and view fixity audit logs of metadata. So again, once again, a special thanks to UConn CTDA for allowing us to make this announcement and provide it to the general community. Pardon me, links to all of this within my slides, and I'll be happy to share them if you can check them out. But I'm just about at time. I had to skip a few things and I caught myself up, but thank you very much. And yeah, if there's any questions, Great screen mirroring.
On your migration process.
Okay, probably not the best resource to be talking about the whole migration process. I just wanted to highlight exactly how we do it. But was there any particular question?
Not particular question. I'm just hoping to go that same route with our migration straight from Fedora. We have over 20 terabytes of data to move, so thank you.
So more so about how to like mount the NF store that is for reading only, so it can be mapped, I suppose, to the destination. Yeah. Okay. Luke, do you mind talking about that at all? This isn't really something within my wheelhouse. As I said, I'm more of a front end developer. I get to present like this today. Oh. Go for it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Luke again. So what we do is we mount the object store and data stream store as read only, just as a best practice against the Islandora 8 instance while the Islandora 7 instance is still live. And then we have a plugin that we put into that's for the Fly system that allows us to mount that allows it to read the Foxmal, and we use that to create the nodes and attach the media within. So it extracts all the information it needs directly from the Foxmal itself over NFS, or I mean. It also can use archival Foxmal if you have exports, but generally, I mean, you're best off just have you like mounting it directly. That way you don't have to export everything first or, have a bunch of copies of it. So yeah, and I mentioned in an earlier presentation, one thing that we're working on with an existing organization is they have 100 terabytes. And they can't afford to have 300 terabytes if they have to export it first. So one thing we're doing with them is we're going to make use of the existing object store and data stream store and just have file pointers in Drupal to the original OBJ and derivatives, so they don't have to regenerate their derivatives either. Because they can't do that because a lot of their derivatives, some of the OCR and some of the things they had to manually intervene with to get them figured out because they have such a variety of data that some of it was problematic. So we're going to use the existing files as is, and that existing folder structure will just be maintained and not changed. And if they have to regenerate derivatives or change anything in the future or ingest new data, it would just go into another folder structure that will sit beside it. And this work is currently in progress. It hasn't been done yet, but we're going to do it. We hope to have it done by the end of the year. I mean, we can get pretty in depth. I don't think we have enough time to get too in depth with it. But I mean, if you want to send me an email, just luke@discoverygarden.ca. I mean, I could see if I can answer any more questions, or you could hit me up in Slack. I mean, I'm in Slack as well.
So there was also, thank you so much.
All right, no problem.
Appropriate for me to answer that. Thank you. There's also another question in there about the potential of sharing the DJI image discovery module. As of right now, I'm going to say no, but this is something that I'm very much interested in contributing back to the community, but it entirely depends on, the decision of others and not necessarily myself. I'd love to talk about it a little bit more and actually maybe build a community version of it, but as of right now, no. Sorry, the question in the chat, how is Fixity different from RipRap? I'm not familiar enough exactly with how RipRap works, but it's a Drupal module versus Luke wants to talk about it himself, so.
Real quick. So it's just a basic Drupal module. It's not a microservice. It's just a different approach. It effectively just makes use of file hash, the module that's already enabled. I think a lot of people have enabled by default. I know we do. So it's just it basically extends what file hash is already doing by default, and it just adds a bit more to that. So it's just a different approach, and it's just a plain Drupal module. And you could take advantage of it. Like it's there, you go look at it, you can try it out. And yeah, we're open to feedback.
Let me go ahead and actually send that in the chat so folks can get to it.
Okay.
Yes. What was that question? All right, Carrie, what was that question? You have your hand raised?
Sorry, I don't actually have a question. I just want to really thank you guys for everything you contributed to this project. Obviously, you're a huge part of the project, and and I really want to congratulate you on Limerick and that theme, because that is a gorgeous site.
Thank you very much. We have other builders in the audience today as well. Joanna has done so much work on making it what it is. Thank you very much. MD5 hatch checks for migration data validation. Yes, question mark? Potentially, yes, given that it runs on Drupal's on the Drupal side. It depends on what point you're intending executing those Fixity checks, I suppose, but yes, potentially. Very much.